The best attachments. So after countless hours playing this game, I definitely think that I have a solid grasp on which attachments are used the most, why people prefer some over others, why they are wrong, as well as how each one affects your weapons. I think apart from general experience, just noticing what the best players use for tournaments is a great way to validate some assumptions on which attachments can be considered the best, and even though this game is balanced really well, there are actually some attachments that are better than others, or at least statistically used more effectively. I think the developers countered this a bit by taking some attachment options away from some weapons, but for the most part you can use the same method for choosing attachments for the majority of your operators. Also, the weapons themselves are specifically catered to each operator to help balance them out, like Twitch with the F2, aka the FAMAS, so don't expect that any of the attachments are going to make up for a lack of skill, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. So let's start with some overall guidelines, like the fact that there is no reason to run a weapon without attachments. It would be great if you could bring extra gadgets or aim down sights faster when you ran a gun bare, but at the moment the amount of attachments you have doesn't affect your movement speed, or aim down sight speed, which is classified as your mobility rating for each weapon in the game. So the higher the mobility of a weapon, the faster you'll aim down sights. For instance, a pistol or SMG will ADS faster than a shotgun or assault rifle, and it's the type of weapon and not the attachment that define the stat. So unless you want to be at a disadvantage or just like how a weapon looks naked, make sure to spend some renown on modding your weapons. The only exception to this is with the laser sight. There are very few times where I think the laser sight actually makes sense to use. The obvious exception is when you're running with the shield. By all means, slap a laser on those pistols because the hipfire is all over the place, and this will help you line up your shots and be a little more accurate without dropping your shield or exposing your head, especially once the developers get rid of the quick scoping tactic I've seen some players use. You're already clanking around with a shield that the defenders can hear well before your laser will give away your position, so make sure to attach this to your weapon only in this case. Otherwise, for the most part, leave this slot open and avoid the laser sight. Like I said before, it does make hipfire more accurate, and hipfiring will be faster than trying to aim down sights when an enemy surprises you, but if you're playing how you should, using cover, listening for enemies, utilizing your drones, and clearing areas slowly while aiming down sights, this should rarely happen. For those times when you do have to hipfire like a maniac, it shouldn't outweigh the times where the laser will give away your position, which happens more often than you would expect, especially against experienced players, and if you do lose a hipfire engagement, you probably would have lost even with the laser anyway. So, for example, this is you using a laser and me aiming in the completely wrong direction until I see this little glowing light moving slowly across right here. Then back to you getting annihilated by my silent shotty, where otherwise you probably would have gotten the kill. They might make the hipfire accuracy buff for the laser more significant to make it more useful, but at the moment, and once again, avoid this and let's move on. So the next one is really simple, with the foregrip only having positive effects on your weapon, significantly reducing your upward recoil and letting you get really tight groupings when you burst fire. There are no negative side effects, so make sure to attach this if it's available, and if it isn't and the weapon has something similar, it will have the same effects already a part of the weapon statistics. So on to the more complicated attachments, starting with the sights. One rule of thumb is if you have the ACOG as an option, you should equip it for all but the highest rate of fire and recoil weapons. This is the case mostly because of those one headshot kills, but when you're clearing rooms, sometimes all you can see of an enemy is a couple of square centimeters, and you need to be able to land those shots with the least amount of your body exposed. Also, even with the higher rate of fire weapons like the SMGs, that very first shot is really accurate and can easily land a headshot at medium distances. One thing I've noticed is how well players can blend into their cover, and the higher zoom will help you determine which is which faster while you're peeking and dropping behind cover. The higher zoom does reduce your peripheral vision, but it does also give you the ability to slice the pie or clear areas in a half circle motion further from cover, making you a harder target to enemies if they spot you at the same time. I do admit that this sight doesn't excel in close quarters and it makes recoil control very difficult, but if you're clearing corners and rooms properly, rarely should you be surprised and have to quickly aim down sights when the enemy is already too close for comfort. Remember that the extra zoom doesn't mean you should barricade yourself in a corner or move really slowly when clearing areas. You should still try to be aggressive on either side. Another thing to consider with this sight is how much of your field of view the sight takes up when it's at your hip, which can cause you to lose some spatial awareness on your right side since it's somewhat large. Also, the border you have when you're aiming down sights, meaning the blind spots from the housing of the scope itself, is also significant, but the aperture is big and the outer field of view isn't reduced significantly, so none of these aspects outweigh the benefits of this sight. Unfortunately, the ACOG isn't available to all the weapons, and I think this was a way to balance out some of the more accurate SMGs. Also, obviously, the shotguns wouldn't do well with higher magnification, but I do think the last 3 sights are balanced a little better despite everyone thinking that the holographic sight is easily the best. So before I get into it, look at the 3 of them side by side. The first thing to consider is the zoom, just in case they add more optics in the future, the reticle, and then the housing. None of these 3 sights have zoom, but both the reflex and RDS optics have slightly smaller sight pictures and less precise reticles than the holographic sight. This is countered by a moderate housing which won't hurt your peripheral vision significantly when aiming down sights. The holographic sight has the most precise reticle, but with a huge housing that causes some significant blind spots on the top and sides of the sight, and don't forget that huge block at the bottom that takes up a large portion of your field of view. Just to cancel out one of the Western optics, the reflex sight takes up more of your field of view with its lower housing than the RDS, and it has a small sight picture in addition to a large triangular reticle that makes it hard to be accurate at any distance that isn't up close. The upper and side housing is pretty thin, and the green color of the reticle prevents you from losing it when firing, but that shape and size of the reticle and the sight picture really makes it the least effective. So your best bet is to choose between the holographic and the RDS, and to avoid confrontation, I'll leave this one up to you. Personally, I prefer the RDS sight because of the minimal housing and the fact that the sight picture is round, giving you the best field of view outside of the sight, but I do agree that the precise dot on the holographic helps you line up your shots on smaller targets, especially at medium ranges, but I seriously cannot stand the size of the housing and how much of your field of view it takes up when aiming down sights. I've gotten used to the larger dot on the red dot sight, which is catered more towards really close engagements, so I don't have a hard time lining up shots further out, but if you do, the holo sight is a great choice, and like I said before, has a slightly wider sight picture. Just to quickly touch on the best Russian optics, the ACOG is a great choice, but in this case for the non-magnified sights, the holo is definitely the worst one, with the reflex being my preferred choice because of the large sight picture, thin housing, and precise green reticle. Finally, onto the barrel attachment, starting with the least complicated flash hider. So the flash hider doesn't actually hide the muzzle flash from other players, it redirects the gases away from your sight picture so it doesn't distort your vision while aiming down sights and firing. This really does help keep a clear view of your target even while shooting, and is a great choice for your more accurate primary weapons in combination with the vertical grip. So contrary to the way a compensator works in real life, this attachment in the game doesn't specifically reduce the upward recoil of a weapon, it actually reduces the random bullet deviation that occurs with automatic or burst fire. So that first shot is going to be on point with any attachment, but the second and third shots are going to have some random horizontal and vertical deviation in addition to the upward recoil. For the most part, this can be controlled to give you some pretty good groupings, but because the slight deviation is random, you'll always get a larger grouping without the compensator. The higher the rate of fire and the lower the accuracy of the weapon you're using will result in even more deviation and larger groupings, even with really good recoil control. So this one is one of my favorites, but it does redirect the muzzle flash upward, really distorting your view with each shot, especially when you're shooting from a lit up location into a low light area. So you'll have to consider this when deciding on your attachment. So far, I haven't found that the flash disrupts my accuracy or affects my spatial awareness, leaving me vulnerable to the peeker's advantage from players I'm not aiming at, so I prefer this attachment over the flash hider most of the time, but like I said, shooting from the outside on a daylight map can be more disorienting with this attachment. The last attachment is the suppressor, which is the most complicated in terms of its pros and cons. It obviously reduces the sound of your weapon when firing, and while it doesn't make you silent, it definitely makes it very hard to pinpoint your exact location. In addition to the noise suppression, you won't have as significant of a vapor trail when using the suppressor, making it even more difficult to locate you. I think it's in popular opinion that because there's no mini-map and there's a kill cam, or at least a visual of the enemy location, even on ranked, that the suppressor isn't really useful, but if you're an aggressive flanker, you will definitely have an extra split-second advantage over a group of enemies when you start to take them out. One negative aspect is the extra length the suppressor puts on your weapon that you'll have to avoid letting peek beyond your cover. Sustained fire causes some gas buildup that will distort your view slightly, but this isn't really that significant. The biggest downside is the lower initial damage that you'll get with your weapon, which in turn increases your damage drop-off proportionally, which means that you'll need to land a few more shots to take out an enemy, especially at further ranges when you can't land that headshot. It also reduces your bullet penetration, so shooting through walls is still possible, but it's going to take quite a few more shots to make an actual hole to get that full damage from each shot. The suppressor definitely works better with the higher speed and low armor operators, letting you shoot and move quickly without making any significant noise with your footsteps or your weapon, but requires you to be pretty aggressive if you want to make the most of it. I do like to put the suppressor on some of my sidearms so I can switch to them from my primary to take out unaware enemies with one headshot or destroy gadgets without making my location obvious. For the most part, this should be your last choice in terms of barrel attachments apart from running the stock barrel, because you're going to need a specific operator and strategy to make this attachment work effectively enough to outweigh the benefits of higher damage, penetration, and accuracy. Alright, so I hope this gave you a good idea of the pros and cons of each attachment and which one will help supplement your operator and your personal style of play, but I think that is it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you on the next video.